Most people think they know what capitalism is based on: free markets, minimal government intervention. The idea goes, if everyone pursues their own interest, society will naturally function smoothly. And if you ask the source of this idea, everyone gives the same answer. Adam Smith, that dusty wig-wearing man, the father of economics, the prophet of laissez-faire. But the interesting thing is, Adam Smith never believed in the version of capitalism quoted from him today. In fact, most of the people who glorify his name are precisely the ones he warned about. Before talking about the invisible hand, we need to take a step back. Most people have actually never heard what Smith really advocated, and it's not really their fault. Over the past century, a kind of economic mythology has been built using Smith's name that now feels almost like common sense. The mythology goes like this: the state should not interfere with the economy. Markets should operate freely, and competition naturally generates prosperity. Economists named this idea laissez-faire, French for let them do as they please. The story is simple and ideological. Adam Smith believed markets should be left alone, trusted greed more than the state, and unregulated trade was the purest form of human progress. A nice story, clean, ideological, and simple. But there's a small problem. Adam Smith never said this even once. If he saw modern capitalist free markets, he would probably ask, who rewrote my book and why did they erase all my warnings? Let's return to Smith's real world. Not the version taught with slogans, but the world the man himself lived in. Smith was born in Scotland in 1723. He grew up in a society with harsh winters, limited opportunities, and a social hierarchy where birth mattered more than talent. Britain was not a free market country at the time. Trade was monopolized by the crown. Prices were controlled by guilds, and industries were in the hands of cartels. Global trade was dominated by massive companies. For example, the East India Company was like a power with its own army and political influence. Smith's observation was clear. Economic power and political power were deeply intertwined. Markets were not operating freely, and private interests manipulated rules in their favor. Smith wrote, "People rarely come together for the same trade, but their conversations mostly end in a plot against the public. So when merchants unite, society loses. This is not a slogan of free capitalism." And most textbooks skip this. Smith was not trained as an economist. He didn't even see himself as an economist. He was a moral philosopher. He studied human behavior, empathy, and why we act justly or not toward others. If you read his book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, you'll see immediately. Smith believed societies work only if people act with a bit of kindness and mutual responsibility. He believed in morality, not greed, as the force that guides the world. And here is the biggest surprise in Smith's legacy: the invisible hand. That expression everyone knows today, but misunderstands. Smith used it only 3 times in all his writings. 3 times. And none of them describe markets automatically correcting themselves. None are sacred proof of deregulation. The first usage appears in an astronomy essay. Here the invisible hand describes people's tendency to attribute unexplainable events to gods. It has nothing to do with the market. Smith observed humans invent comforting stories to make sense of chaos. If modern capitalism sought a metaphor, this might be more accurate. But no one quotes it. The second usage appears in The Wealth of Nations, the one everyone knows. But the context is often ignored. Smith is talking about a merchant. This merchant prefers to invest in the local economy because he fears the risks of foreign trade. But the reason is neither patriotism, nor rationality, nor economic enlightenment. Fear guides his choice. And interestingly, this fear accidentally produces a benefit for society. This is where Smith's invisible hand comes in. But notice, it's a rule-breaking exception, a coincidence. Yet in the following century, economists and politicians marketed this single example as a universal economic principle. It became the sacred proof of deregulation and free markets. Irony is almost cartoonish. Smith's whole point was that individuals pursuing their own interest do not reliably produce good outcomes. But modern capitalism reversed it completely. The third and final usage appears in the theory of moral sentiments and is one of the most striking examples. Smith talks about wealthy landowners, greedy, insatiable, and selfish beings. They accumulate resources but cannot consume them all due to physical limits, and so the poor survive thanks to these leftovers. Smith's depiction is not an act of kindness or justice. It's the natural result of the limits of gluttony. The wealthy do not share. They simply cannot consume everything. This is the third and final use of the invisible hand, a coincidental public benefit. In summary, Smith's three uses of the invisible hand are superstition, fear, and the limits of greed. Nothing to do with modern neoliberal economics. Yet in the 20th century this small metaphor became a huge doctrine. Economists from the Chicago School to Reagan-era policymakers, from corporate lobbyists to pro-market think tanks, used the invisible hand like a sacred text. Regulation is unnecessary, the state is harmful, and the market automatically fixes everything. Everything Smith warned against was erased, simplified, and his moral philosophy ignored. Smith's fundamental warning is clear. Individuals pursuing their own interests do not reliably produce good outcomes. They often produce bad outcomes. The wealth of nations aim to show why markets fail, how monopolies form, how cartels manipulate prices, how companies corrupt governments, and how economic power concentrates. The invisible hand is not a remedy, it is an exception. Yet over time the exception became a brand. Looking at modern capitalism today, the picture is disturbing. Tech giants, companies shaping information, retail monopolies, financial institutions whose failures require national bailouts. These are not free markets. They are well-PR'd cartels. And politicians present the invisible hand as if it were a cosmic safety net. Smith's initial metaphor of superstition returns here. People believe in invisible forces to explain chaos. The truth is simple. Markets do not self-correct. Power does not self-limit. And greed, if left unchecked, consumes everything, even the system that sustains it. Modern capitalism has become what Smith feared most. A few people manipulate the game so that market outcomes seem like fate rather than design. But Smith's message is not pessimistic. Economics is human, flawed, but fixable. What matters is balance. Markets strong enough to innovate, governments strong enough to regulate, and societies wise enough to demand justice. The invisible hand does not save us. We do. History does not repeat, but if you don't understand it, it crushes you. Smith's message is here. The economy is flawed but human, complex but fixable. Expecting markets to heal themselves is naive. Expecting power holders to self-limit is delusional, and leaving greed unchecked invites disaster. Modern capitalism has become exactly what Smith feared most. A few powerful actors manipulate the system so that market outcomes appear natural, as if dictated by the laws of nature. Look at today's world. Massive tech companies, giants shaping the flow of information, retail monopolies, and financial institutions requiring national bailouts. These are not free markets. They are rule-breaking, PR-savvy cartels. And strangely, policymakers present the invisible hand as a cosmic safety net. Here is exactly the superstition Smith criticized. People believe an invisible hand explains the chaos, when no such hand exists. In Smith's real world, markets work only when power is distributed and rules are strictly enforced. He supported state intervention in education, banking, public works, natural monopoly oversight, infrastructure, and enforcement of regulations. Government must act to prevent monopolies from becoming too powerful, gaining political influence, and manipulating the public. And here's the biggest irony. Adam Smith became the mascot of neoliberalism and deregulation. Yet all his warnings, hundreds of pages of analysis, calls to fight monopolies, and emphasis on social justice were erased over time. Modern capitalism has transformed into exactly what Smith feared most. A few actors concentrate both economic and political power so that market outcomes appear as natural order, when in fact, it is a fully designed system. So what did Smith really teach us? The invisible hand does not save us. When people pursue their self-interest without rules and oversight, chaos and inequality are inevitable. But the economy, flawed and human as it is, can be corrected. The key is balance. Markets strong enough to innovate, a state strong enough to regulate, and a society wise enough to demand justice. Human greed and selfishness can sow disaster, but reason and ethics can correct the system. Smith's legacy is, in fact, a philosophy about human behavior and morality, not an economic slogan. Modern capitalism, by ignoring his warnings and turning a single metaphor into a sacred doctrine, claiming markets are perfect, created exactly what he feared most: a system where power concentrates, goes unregulated, and produces inequality. In short, markets do not self-correct. Power does not self-limit. Greed, if left unchecked, consumes everything, even the system that sustains it. But understanding, ethics, and reason can shape this system. The invisible hand does not save us. We are the ones who will.